لا احنا ما نقاتل مع القوات الامريكيه، الامريكان لليوم هو عدونا.
والله هم اللي بدأوا بالقصاص نقص. وهناك أناس تقتل على هذه الساعة.
The militias have kind of taken over. It's not really the government leading the militias, it's the other way around.
This is literally the very front line in the global fight against the Islamic State.
A year on from the beginning of Iraq's war with the Islamic State, Vice News travelled to Iraq to meet the Shia militias fighting on the front lines to defend their country. Saeed Hamid al-Yasri, leader of Ansar al-Majahir, a relatively new militia from southern Iraq, agreed to take us to the front lines in Anbar province, an Islamic State stronghold just west of Baghdad.
كانت هذه المنطقة منطقة العامرية محاصرة لفترة 9 أشهر، فمن جينا فكينا الحصار عنها وسيطرنا على الجسم. بهاي المنطقة تقريبا أكثر من 200، والملفت للنظر كل الدواعش اللي انقتلوا بهاي المناطق جنسيات أجانب.
Following the collapse of the Iraqi army after the capture of Mosul, the Islamic State advanced swiftly south, taking a third of the country before forcing Iraq's Shia militias to step in and halt the push on Baghdad. We arrived in the countryside outside of the town of Amirat al-Fallujah that had been seized from the Islamic State by the Majahir in the last 6 months. Fighting is, however, still constant, and areas like this are a key obstacle to the Islamic State's march on Baghdad.
So this is the Amirat bridge that runs over the river Euphrates. The bridge used to run to Amirat al-Fallujah further down the road, but when ISIS were pushed out of this position, they packed it full of C4 explosives and blew the bridge to slow down the Majahir fighters. This area around here is all Sunni, which you'd expect there would be problems between the Sunnis and the Shia volunteers, but actually the Shia volunteers here fight alongside some of the Sunni tribes here to stop ISIS attacks in the area.
هذا العيساوي البطل. بالتعاون مع القوات الأمنية استطاعوا حماية هذه المنطقة وحرس هذه المنطقة، والآن بدأوا يتقدمون لتحرير كل المناطق اللي يقترب منها الدواعش. صدق؟ اليوم أودي لك علبة.
القوة هنا السنة والشيعة وكنا نقاتل قتال واحد، يعني السني زائد الشيعي، يعني قتال واحد، ما يحاول أي واحد يقدر يخترق هاي القوة.
As you're from a Sunni tribe, have the government been helping you with weapons and finance to help you guys defend this area?
دعم كان لنا دعم، بس إن شاء الله الدعم راح يوصلنا بعد الزيارة، إن شاء الله بعد الزيارة راح يوصلنا الدعم. بس حاليا دعم كعتاد ما عندنا عتاد، خلصنا عتاد حاليا.
احنا اهم شيء هيك قطرون عليها تقطير والله نشتري. يلا يا شباب. اكو بعض الأحيان يصير قصف هاونات.
Yasri heard that the Islamic State were advancing on one of the Majahir positions and that a firefight had broken out, so we made our way there to see the close quarters fighting for ourselves.
So according to the fighters here, ISIS are only a couple of 100 meters away, and this position here comes under attack every day. ISIS try and move through the palm groves to attack the trenches and the buildings here, but also attack them with mortars. Hear them replying, they're firing back towards this farmhouse. The Majahir fighters sing to Imam Abbas and Hussein, the main figures in the Shia religion. I guess it's a way to essentially troll ISIS. The fighters here saying ISIS are only 100 meters away. These guys are also using heavy machine gun dushkas and RPGs against ISIS positions. This is literally the very front line in the global fight against the Islamic State. It's It's pretty frightening, but this is what these guys do day in, day out here, fighting against the Islamic State, and they're getting very little support from the outside world and even their own government.
Back at the base, the fighters were jubilant to have returned without any casualties.
كانت التوجيهات تصلنا يوميا من مكتب السيد السيستاني: إياكم والمساس بآثاث أهالي هذه المناطق، إياكم والمساس. كان الهم الأول الذي أوصتنا به المرجعية: يجب أن تشعروا هؤلاء الأهالي بالاطمئنان باللجوء إلى التجار الأسلحة، تجار المادة السلاحية الموجودة في الأسواق. حتى سعر البندقية التي كان ب500,000 أصبح في 2,000,000 أو 1,500,000. جئنا لنقول لتختلط دماءنا مع دماءكم ولنضع أيدينا بأيديكم لضرب هذه الحركات التكفيرية الإرهابية التي جاءت.
احنا هم القصاص وهم البدوي، والله هم البدوي القصاص نقصهم. هاي السكينة مطلعها تاريخ.
شنو التاريخ؟ شنو؟
تاريخ موجود.
The Majai are just one of many militias fending off the threat of the Islamic State in Iraq. Following the capture of Mosul by the Islamic State, Ayatollah Sistani, the most important Shia cleric in Iraq, called on all able-bodied Iraqis to help defend the country. In the following weeks, tens of thousands of men joined a number of different militias, some backed by Iran and some with a history of sectarian abuses. We travelled south to Karbala, home of two of the most sacred shrines in Shia Islam, to see what many of the militias are fighting to protect.
So this is the Al-Hara al-Husseini, which is the compound in Karbala that contains the two shrines to Imam Abbas and Imam Hussein. They were two brothers and grandsons of the Prophet Muhammad who were martyred in the 7th century in the Battle of Karbala, making Karbala the most holiest of cities for Shia Muslims, which also makes it a prime target for ISIS fighters. Currently it's a Muharram, which is sort of a holy time commemorating the death of the two brothers, and there's millions of pilgrims come here during this period. You've got lots of people here even sleeping overnight at the shrines. Lots of Iranians come by bus over the border through Iraq. It's a massive complex. Thousands of people come here and pray every day, but despite the massive threat that ISIS pose, people don't seem to be put off at all.
If the Islamic State were able to attack Karbala and reignite the Sunni-Shia conflict, the state of Iraq itself could be at jeopardy, with the breakup of Iraq into smaller sectarian states a genuine possibility, which makes the Shia militia's role in protecting the shrines and routes of the pilgrims appear all the more vital. We travelled to the west of Samarra, home to another important Shia shrine where Harakat Nujaba, a militia comprised of veterans of the Shia insurgency against the United States, were involved in heavy clashes with the Islamic State the day before.
It's got to be one of the more dangerous roads I've ever travelled on. There's hardly any traffic and the roadside is littered with burnt out and destroyed vehicles. We're having to travel very fast in between the checkpoints because the road is constantly targeted by mortar and sniper fire. So this is a Nujaba position. They control the west side of Samarra along the highway towards Tikrit. On the road we came up here, you can see a lot of craters in the road. The fighters were saying they were remnants of IEDs that ISIS left behind.
هذا الاحتلال الأمريكي في العراق تم تشكيل المقاومة العراقية موجودة بالشيعية الموجودة في العراق.
And do you find it weird then that you're essentially fighting on the same side of the Americans now?
لا احنا ما نقاتل مع القوات الأمريكية. الأمريكان لليوم هو عدونا.
The fighters here saying that yesterday one of the ISIS pickup trucks with the heavy machine gun mounted on top was using this area as a firing position to hit their troops further down the road. The fighters also say that they use the Dushka heavy machine guns, which can also hit aircraft and helicopters, to target the Iraqi army helicopters that patrol the road, covering the pilgrims moving to Samarra and then moving from Samarra down to Karbala. So the Nujabah fighters are saying that this little farmhouse here was where ISIS were camping out over the past few days, using it to launch attacks on their positions further east. They're saying that when the Nujabah fought back, they retreated inside the farmhouse, and you can see bullets smashed up the walls here. They managed to hit a couple of ISIS guys, some body armour here covered in blood. This is where the ISIS sniper was taking position, and they're saying they managed to get him, they killed him. Despite Islamic State enforcing a no smoking ban across their so-called caliphate, lots of cigarette butts around here. So a couple of shots just got fired. I'm not sure whether it was the ISIS fighters, certainly pretty close. The bins of mortar rounds just dotted around.
No. From this now.
That was today?
No, today.
Wow. Quickly out of the open ground. Because the fighters here fear that ISIS have got snipers watching this position, we had to essentially sprint from the last farmhouse to this one whilst they provided covering fire. They're now basically prepping a mortar. There's a guy on the roof in the farmhouse behind him, checking to see where the mortar landed and then telling him to adjust the distance to make sure that they hit the target. You can actually see the smoke from that one, it's very close.
With what appears to be direct hits on the Islamic State positions, we begin to move back towards the Nujabah's HQ.
The Nujabah fighters are saying this is where ISIS treated their wounded in the battle over the past couple of days. They've now obviously since fled, and the Nujabah have destroyed half the building. Though we can't see that much evidence of any sort of medical equipment being used or bandages or anything like that. This was clearly someone's home at some point. Now it's been destroyed. It'll be a long time before the civilians in this area will be able to return.
With many thousands of Iraqi civilians displaced by the fighting, we travel to Baghdad to see the fallout from the militias' war against the Islamic State.
We've come here to West Baghdad to meet some Sunni families from Anbar who've fled a combination of ISIS attacks, Shia militia abuses and indiscriminate barrel bombings by the Iraqi army. A lot of these families come here to this mosque to receive food and medical aid donated privately because the government basically isn't helping them enough.
ضد الديالة يعني تنشط فيها الميليشيات الشيعية فالناس نزحت الفلوجة والأنبار نزحت بسبب العنف الداعشي كما هو موجود يعني.
What do you think of the Shia militias' involvement in the war against the Islamic State?
أصبحت لها مساحة واسعة تماما بالصولة والجولة في القتل والنهب وسرقة أموال الناس خصوصا بعد أحداث الموصل بفتوى من قبل المرجعية. وأنا أجري معك اللقاء الآن هناك أناس ينحرون بالسكاكين وهناك أناس تقتل على وياتها هذه الساعة ومستمرة غير منقطعة. نسأل الله العفو والعافية.
Do you think these attacks by the government, the indiscriminate bombing and the abuses carried out by the Shia militias, do you think that will drive some people to join ISIS and fight for them?
يعني الشباب المتحمس الذي يرى قد والده قد قتلت أو أن أخته قد اغتصبت كيف الناس لا تحقد؟ كيف الناس لا يكون ناتج سريع لهذا؟ هذا هم ليس من نبت البلد ولكنها نتائج يعني فورية لما نراه من ردات فعل. هذا لا يمثلنا، لا نمثل، ولكننا لا نستطيع أن نرتدع الناس. أن الحكومة الآن تكتب بأسماء طائفية وأسماء رموز سنية.
Despite the successes the militias have had in combating the Islamic State, various reports have surfaced documenting abuses carried out by the militias, who largely remain outside of the government's control. We met with someone from Human Rights Watch who wished to remain anonymous for fear of their safety on returning to Iraq.
You have militias who are on the front lines, and the kinds of abuses that we've been seeing there by the militias, once they clear an area of ISIS, they then go back, to the villages that they've cleared, and any civilians that are left there, they expel from the villages. We've documented widespread burning and destruction of homes. That's something that we've recorded in literally every single place where militias are leading the fight against ISIS. In some instances, we have documented them carrying out summary executions of people afterwards. There's definitely different spheres of control that each militia has, but the ones that we've documented the most abuses by are definitely Better Organization, which now the head of Better Organization, Hadi al-Amri, used to be Iraq's transport minister. He's an extremely powerful figure, and he's essentially acting with total impunity now. It's not really the government leading the militias, it's the other way around.
We're on our way to Diyala province to meet Hadi Amri, a figure who possibly epitomizes the controversial nature of the Shia militia's involvement in the war against the Islamic State. Amri is a former anti-Saddam guerrilla fighter who's been accused of running death squads during the sectarian civil conflict 8 years ago, but now heads up the Badr organization, a political party with its own militia that's considered to be one of the strongest and most powerful in the country. The Badr organization has been responsible for a string of successes against the Islamic State, but also have been accused of a number of abuses against Sunni communities in areas they control.
With Amri given overall control of the military operation in Diyala, we met up with him as his forces, alongside the Iraqi army, were constructing a road through the province to relieve besieged militias further north.
خلي اضرب البعيسه اعطيني البعيسه البعيسه عندنا موجود اي اضرب البعيسه هذا بالجهه الغربيه للعظيم عدو والجهه الشرقيه هذا ربعنا هم ما عندهم تواجد بهاي النقطه معي ان شاء الله. استطعنا اليوم كنا نعمل ما شفت رايتك بعينك عملنا كفريق عمل واحد. الجيش لوحده غير قادر. الفساد الإداري والمالي هذا أحد العوامل الأساسية التي أدت إلى انهيار المؤسسة العسكرية. هؤلاء يعتقدون أنه بفتوى السيد السيستاني القتال ضد داعش هو جهاد في سبيل الله.
We've seen pictures of Qasem Soleimani visiting you and your forces around Amelie. Is Iran continuing to help you in this fight against ISIS here?
لولا الدعم الإيراني لسقط العراق بداعش. الحقيقة يجب أن يفهمها الجميع أنه نحن لدينا كانت مشكلة حقيقية تسليح تجهيز عندما بدأت المعركة لا الجيش ولا الشرطة حتى عتاد ما عندهم.
A lot of people fear presence of some of the Shia volunteer units in Sunni areas, and there have been abuses recorded by some of your forces and others. How do you explain those abuses, and how do you make sure that they're not going to happen again?
عشرات الرسائل توصلني باليوم تعالوا مستعدين أن نتعاون معكم نقاتل معكم من أجل تحرير مناطق من داعش. قوات الحشد الشعبي أعتبرها اليوم العمود الفقري في الدفاع عن العراق. مرات يعني أقول لهم قوات التحالف موجودة ويقول يعني اضرب، قال لي والله أي تأثير ما نشوف. يعني إجا انضم مثل بإبرة تخدير للحكومة إنه راح يجي يعتمدون على التحالف الدولي من أجل أن يتخلصوا من داعش. لذلك إذا نخلص من إبرة التخدير ونعتقد أنه إحنا نقوم بتحرير بلدنا، أنا أعتقد الفترة ما تستغرق كثير بالشام.
عالجهم عين ابو علي، عالجهم هم كلهم دواعش في الصفحه.
وهذه التجربه جعلت ان تعتقد الحكومه انها بحاجه الى جهاز اخر، ولذلك نحن نعتقد هؤلاء يجب ان نفكر باطار قانوني تقوم به الحكومه لاحتوائهم.
عاش ايدك ابو علي، عاش ايدك.
It's quite stunning that Iraq finds itself in the situation that it currently does. That despite the billions of dollars spent on the Iraqi army, the government has had to rely on a number of different militias and volunteer groups, some of whom have already committed a number of abuses to help defend the country. Baghdad may be relatively safe, but millions of Iraqis are still at the mercy of the Islamic State. With the war progressing slowly and the militias only growing in power, there is a good chance that they could become a threat to Iraq's fragile sectarian and political balance.
This war is not going to end anytime soon. It's going to continue to spread. It's going to continue to become more polarized, more sectarian. There's a good chance that we'll see a breakup of Iraq.